Pakistan, the Garrison state by Ishtiaq Ahmed. Indeed, conspiracies against Pakistan may exist, but it can also be self-fulfilling prophecy. What cannot be denied, however, is that most, if not all, acts of violence and terrorism that spill blood in Pakistan are homegrown. In 2003, when an assassination attempt was made on General Pervez Musharraf, Pakistani officials and government installations and buildings, including those of the armed forces, have been the objects of various terrorist attacks by homegrown extremist organizations. The 25th century is being celebrated as the Asian century. Actually, the Asian country began to gestate in the 1960s, and ironically, Pakistan was one of the earliest beneficiaries. In the first half of the 1960s, Pakistani economy performed so well that it won admirers in several South Asian countries, which studied its industrial planning and later became engines of economic growth. It all started, however, farther away in the East Asia. Japan, destroyed during the Second World War, rose from the ashes to become the paragon powerhouse of industrial and economic development in the 1960s. From the 1970s onward, several Southeast countries embarked upon a transformation that earned the title of Asian Tigers. China followed suit in the 1980s, and it is now the second largest power of the world. India jumped onto the bandwagon of economic development in the 1990s and has been performing impressively. Pakistan's ideal geographical location qualifies it to seize the new opportunities that are currently available. Nations have to seize the moment. Pakistan's cultural and religious links with West Asia and Central Asia can be assets. In 1947, the Pakistan military was poorly armed and lacked the infrastructure and training needed to function as an effective branch of the state. It was not directly involved in politics. Over time, not only has it become a middle-range power possessing nuclear weapons, it has also become the most powerful institution in the country, with de facto veto power over politics. How and why did this happen, and what are its consequences? The clues are to be found in a unique mix of real and imagined existential threats to Pakistan and the nature of international politics, in which the emerging bipolar rivalry between the United States of America and the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was exploited by the Pakistani rulers, civil and military, to market Pakistan as a frontline state against the latter, in the hope that the former would supply them with the weapon needed to offset the advantage India enjoyed over it in terms of size, resources and other such factors. Internally incompetent politicians and their factionalism generated conflict and instability, while the civil servants and later the military came to represent stability. Additionally, a lack of clarity on national identity drove Pakistan toward a search for an Islamic identity that should also be democratic. Pakistan sought to develop a strategic understanding with China, which in turn had strained relations with India. Later, further diversification of dependence was attempted by Pakistan on Saudi Arabia. The three donors represented very different ideologies. The United States as the leader of capitalist liberal world, China as the challenger to Soviet domination with the communist movement, and Saudi Arabia as the leader of Islamic fundamentalism. Suffice it to say that at least from the 1980 onwards, hawkish Pakistani military officers began to nurture a vision of Pakistan that went beyond the confines of the territorial nation state. Along with hardcore Islamics, the Hawks began to imagine Pakistan as a great, expansive regional power, extending to Western and Central Asia and a liberated Kashmir free from Indian occupation. Samuel Edward wrote the book The Man on Horseback. Draw attention to the fact that military coups were taking place in states that were neither liberal democracies nor communist, but were autocracies. The military took over the reins of power in such countries because it possessed superior organization and armaments. This makes a great deal of sense as Pakistan has failed to develop into a modern democracy. Not only that, but radicalism, extremism, and terrorism have undermined Pakistan's chances of becoming a credible modern Muslim state. The military is the highest authority. It claims the role of the guardian of national interest. A national security state views democracy with suspicion. The military has got substantial political and economic power. Enemies are described as cunning and ruthless. The national security state restricts public debate. The aim of the armed forces would be to create a large and competent military force dominated by a corps of officers that could provide a broad range of societal services besides security. The garrison state would strive to manage the economy and production in order to provide employment and other services. The leaders of Pakistan began to seek US help even before the state was founded, marketing it as geostrategic ally against Soviet communism. That policy was pursued relentlessly when the country came into being. Pakistan and India attained independence in mid-August 1947. However, India became a democracy that over time has only deepened. For Pakistan creation, Jinnah sought the support of the ulama clerics as they already had access to existing networks through the mosque and religious ceremonies and activities. From 1944 onwards, the ulama and peers were mobilized to support the demand for Pakistan. Pakistan was projected as an Islamic utopia where social justice and piety would prevail in accordance with the lofty vision of true Islam. Consequently, the Muslim League exploited Islamic sentiments, slogans, and heroic themes to rouse the masses during their public meetings and mass contact campaigns. In this regard, Jinnah letter of November 1945 to Pir Sharif is quite revealing. It is needless to emphasize that the Constituent Assembly, which would be predominantly Muslim in its composition, would be able to enact laws for Muslims, not inconsistent with the Sharia laws, and the Muslim will no longer be obligated to abide by the un-Islamic laws. The colonial roots of the Pakistan Army. Indian soldiers from miscellaneous regional backgrounds continued to serve in the army. So-called martial racist theory was adopted, which justified restrictive selection of Muslim, Hindus and Sikhs from specific castes and regions in the Punjab, which meant developing a firm structure of dependence among the Punjabis on the Raj as well as bonds of loyalty among the upper crust of Punjabi society. Besides such careful selection based on class and military districts, the British evolved a sophisticated system of rewarding those connected to the army. Regular pay and allowances, pensions and other economic benefits were available to the soldiers, as well as those who helped recruit them. It is noteworthy 36% of the men in the Indian Army were recruited from the Punjab. chapter is about the first Kashmir War. The Khan of Kalat, however, declared himself independent on 11th August 1947 until under the threat of military action, the state of Kalat acceded to Pakistan at the end of March 1948. The level of education in Pakistan was extremely low and overall social development poor. Pakistani society comprised of rich landlord, a small intelligentsia, and millions of peasants, artisans, and other poor. A middle class was absent. The assassination of Liaquat Ali Khan in 1951 set in motion the internal slide of Pakistani politics. From 1951 onwards, when US military aid began to arrive, the military establishment became the most powerful entity in the country and enhanced its clout over the decision-making process, especially pertaining to defense and foreign policy. Ayub justified the military coup of 7 October 1958. The army could not remain unaffected by the conditions around. A well-organized, trained and disciplined army would find it extremely distasteful to be turned into an instrument for securing political power. But as conditions were, the army alone could act as a coercive force and restore normalcy. Pakistani press was positively inclined towards the military power. The US and British press wrote approving editorials in favor of the coup. Iskandar Mirza at that time was even closer than Ayub Khan to the United States. Indeed, Mirza's pro-American often embraced the Americans. Regarding Ayub martial law, it is not difficult to appreciate that the transition from an inept, corrupt, faction-ridden, unrepresentative civilian government to military rule through martial law, achieved without a single bullet being fired, was widely supported by the larger society. The military moved into the major cities and towns, but Ayub Khan decided to exercise authority through the civil administration. A presidential cabinet was set up. It included 3 generals and a number of civilians, including Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, later the nemesis of his downfall. The Supreme Court, high courts and lower courts continued to function, though fundamental rights were suspended. The most important step taken by Ayub was the appointment of a number of expert committees to investigate and recommend policy on different political, educational and legal matters. Ayub Khan started comparing Bengalis and thinking that they were descendants of the ancient races of India and had a long history of being a subjugated people, a fact that made them suspicious, exclusive and aggressive. On the other hand, the West Pakistanis, as a result of invasions and conquest, a mixture of many races who spoke different languages, but who thus enjoyed a fusion of ideas and outlooks. Ayub wrote, "It would be appropriate to reiterate the fact that our eventual aim must be to develop democracy in Pakistan, but a type that suits the genius of our people. Our people are mostly uneducated and our politicians not so scrupulous. The people are capable of doing great things, but they can also be easily misled. Such an approach, according to Laswell's observation, that the specialists on violence would emphasize their role as custodians of national interest and a political system that sought to control people." Between 1958 and 1962, Ayub initiated a number of reforms. He identified the landlord class as being responsible for holding Pakistan back in both socio-economic and political terms. Land reforms introduced by him imposed a ceiling of 500 acres of irrigated land and 1,000 acres of unirrigated land for a single holding in West Pakistan. Ayub also adopted an industrial policy that offered generous tax incentives to industrial entrepreneurs and exporters. Harvard scholar pointed out that the average consumer's lot improved in the 1960s, but the concentration of wealth in a few hands, known as 22 families. Ayub Khan did not believe that parliamentary democracy was suitable for Pakistan. Ayub attacked the ulama who had opposed the creation of Pakistan on the basis that it would be a secular national state. India had offered a no-war pact to Pakistan in 1950, but it had been rejected by Pakistan because the Kashmir dispute was not being settled. In November 1959, Ayub offered India a joint defense pact, which Nehru rejected with the remark, "Defense against whom? India? Retention of Kashmir is considered essential to its secular identity, while for Pakistan, its acquisition is necessary to complete the division of India on religious basis." Chapter 7, 1965, that India would not retaliate and stab Pakistan's soft belly, Lahore and Sialkot, proved to be a colossal miscalculation. When India attacked Pakistan, the most surprised person was Ayub Khan. Bhutto and Aziz Ahmed were banking on the UN intervention in case the war did not proceed according to their scripts, which was based on the ludicrous assumption that India would not counterattack in the Punjab. Pakistani leadership realized that the Western powers, especially the United States, was not willing to help Pakistan. On the second day of the war, Musa informed Ayub Khan that the army had run out of ammunition. That shocked General Ayub so much that it might even have triggered his heart ailment. Ayub Khan has described the 1965 war as an unnecessary war and said that Ayub Khan should have held his senior generals accountable for the debacle and resigned himself. The 1965 war was a massive exercise in image building for Pakistani military, even when the expedition was a failure. Chapter 8 is about East and West Pakistan, the relationship between the Bengali Muslim majority and the Punjabi dominated establishment comprising civil servants, politicians and the military began to soar rather soon after Pakistan came into being. The reasons were a mix of cultural, economic and political grievances, some inherited from the past and others a product of the omission and commission of the politicians and the civil military that had evolved in Pakistan. In 1947, the population of East Bengal included at least 23% Hindus. Such a large proportion of Hindus, coupled with the overall majority of Bengalis, were from the very beginning viewed with concern and dismay by the power elite of West Pakistan, who wanted to assert an Islamic identity of the Pakistani polity. Foreign aid played the single most important role in Pakistan's economic growth. By 1969, the US had provided $3 billion in grants and loans, mainly loans in the later years. Ahmed had asserted that during the period from 1949 to 69, resources transferred from East to West Pakistan amounted to rupees 31,120 million. The result was that the Bengali peasants, workers and the middle class were all alienated from a share in the economic growth that was taking place. Then the origins of a nationalist movement that increasingly sought to offset their domination by West Pakistan. After months of agitation that rocked West and East Pakistan, Ayub Khan stepped down on 25th March and General Yahya took over the reign of power. Apparently, the top commanders had pressured Ayub Khan to step down. Martial law was imposed throughout the League won 160 out of 162 general seats. Thus, it obtained a massive landslide victory. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party was able to get 84 out of 138 West Pakistani seats. It won majorities in the provinces of Punjab and Sindh. For several weeks after the election, the military regime made no announcement about the National Assembly being called into session. Such inaction only caused the Awami League suspicion and fear that the establishment was unwilling to let it assume power in accordance with the procedure that apply in parliamentary democracy. The commission made a most important revelation: the decision not to hand over power and the use of a military crackdown had been prepared way ahead, and the negotiations which were carried on from the middle of March up to this date were no more than a camouflage. It's being all along the intention of General Yahya Khan and his military advisors to cow down the Awami League with a heavy hand. Hamudur Rahman Commission report. PPP had won a majority of only 2 provinces of West Pakistan, Punjab and Sindh. The Awami League enjoyed an overall majority in parliament, and it was likely to expand its support with the help of other West Pakistani leaders. Therefore, Bhutto's insistence on consensus on the constitution was not justified. Chapter 9, Civil War in Pakistan, India War of 1970. The first action taken was to arrest Mujib from his home at 10:30 p.m. Some resistance was put up by his supporters, which was easily suppressed. Other prominent leaders either went underground or escaped the border into West Bengal. Bhutto was in Dhaka when the military action started on the night of 25-26 March. The next day, Bhutto famously remarked, "Thank God Pakistan has been saved." Military action received support not only from the PPP but also from the West Pakistani power allied, including the capitalist class and the right-wing Pakistani press, including the Urdu language newspaper Nawai Waqt and Jang and the English language Dawn. Yahya Khan was bitter that the Americans and the Chinese had not come to his rescue. The surrender of Dhaka took place on 16 December. It is generally believed that the 1970 election was fair. Tikka was branded as a butcher of Bengal. Chapter 10. The rise and fall of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto came to power in Pakistan once the old order had been badly bruised. On 2nd January 1972, Bhutto's government nationalized all the major industries. Military defeat at the hands of India had put the Pakistan generals on the back foot. The new government let Pakistan's state television air the complete ceremony of the surrender of the Pakistan army in Dhaka on 16 December 1971. This evoked an angry response from the military. It's interesting to note that while demanding proper treatment of the Biharis, the military strongly opposed any idea of them being sent to Pakistan, asserting that they had a home in Bangladesh. On 10th April 1973, the National Assembly voted by 125 votes out of total of 133 in favor of the draft that the Kasuri Committee had prepared. The Constitution proposed a parliamentary democracy based in principle on a federal division of power between the center and the provinces. Bhutto selected Major General Muhammad Ziaulak to head the military. Apparently, Bhutto had been impressed by Zia's modesty and lack of ambition. During the height of the PNA movement, the PPP had begun to allege that the United States was backing the position and millions of dollars had been brought in sacks and distributed to the miscreants. Chapter 11. General Zia braces the fortress of Islam. The military returned to the political domain after 6.5 years of a hectic civilian rule that had been democratic, authoritarian, populist and vindictive.